Brigitte Bardot, Sophia Loren, Gina Lollobrigida, Marilyn Monroe, and Jane Mansfield preceded her as reigning sex goddesses of the movies. Raquel Welch invited me to her home in Beverly Hills one morning to tape an interview. I arrived early and was asked by a housekeeper to just wait in the garden. A few moments later, Raquel, who had just awoke, appeared before me with a cup of coffee in her hand. She wore no makeup and was dressed super casual. Her beauty and sensuality were instant and awesome, and like those who preceded her, it was clear that she had become a prisoner of the goddess-like figure which she presented. Her films were hardly taken seriously, but for a while, long before Pamela Anderson and the few who would follow, she made many a man's heart beat a tad faster, and I confess I was not immune to her charms.
I don't know, I guess the opening question, the most obvious, is that it would appear to most people that as far as women go, you are probably in the most enviable position imaginable. Beautiful, wealthy, successful, independent, all of the accoutrements thereof. Is it worth it? Are you happy? Is this everything that you expected it would be when you first began?
Well, not exactly. I was reading a book last night, and there was a quote in it that I thought that I remembered, that it said that you're always hoping that you'll get there, and when you're there, there's no there. And it's kind of true, because you always carry around the childhood striving and the childhood insecurities with you. No matter what you actually attain in the way of success or wealth or even happiness, you're always that kid in pigtails on the playground that was getting teased for one thing or another and wanting something very much and wanting to explore, and you always sort of remain as you are as a child, strangely, underneath it all. And that's why, there's this sort of little thread of insecurity that runs through all performers, I think, no matter how successful they become, whether they're Frank Sinatra or whoever.
Were you ever that little kid with the pigtails who was being teased?
Oh yeah, I think I was, because when I was a kid my name was Raquel Tejada, and nobody could ever pronounce it right, and now I'm Raquel Welch, which was the name that I got when I married my first husband, who was Jim Welch, and not knowing that I would be a success with that name, I didn't change it in time, so to speak. And so now I'm Raquel Welch, and everybody knows how to pronounce it. But at the time I was, my father's Bolivian, my mother's American English, and I never was the sort of prototype of the American beauty anyway, so I never considered myself to be a great beauty, even though I won a lot of beauty contests when I was around 15, 16 years old.
Where were?
This was in La Jolla, where I went to school. I went to La Jolla High School, and I was sort of, the high school was just up the street from all the surfing cult at Windansea Beach and all the sort of Thomas Wolfe pump house gang, and it was sort of an existentialist beach group there. And I didn't really fit in, because I had great ambitions to be in show business, which was thought of to be very tacky at the time. And kids teased me, because when they asked me, even around 7 years old, what I wanted to be an actress, and they thought that was a huge giggle, and sort of very superficial to them, who thought that all they really needed was the sun and the sand and a can of beer, a six-pack of beer, and that was life, what more did you need? And so it was kind of like that, being a little bit of a misfit in a way, strange kind of a way. I mean, I was successful. I always got very good grades in school and was in the Honor Society, and I got a scholarship to study theater arts at San Diego State College. I got married in the middle of all that and never finished my studies at San Diego State, and had 2 children. And But, I was not the run-of-the-mill. I was successful on my own terms kind of a thing, but I didn't go with the pack. And so, that sort of loner kind of a thing has stayed with me quite a lot. I mean, it's still part of me.
Two things. You said that the first time you conceived of being an actress was when you were about 7 years old.
Yeah, probably before that even. Yeah, probably really before that, but that was when I really started letting my closet ambitions out.
Two thoughts that interest me. You had aspirations to stardom or to being a legitimate actress, a significant actress at a very young age, 5, 6, 7. However, you married while you were in your mid-teens.
Yeah.
So at some point you must have made a decision to put the career beside and get married. What happened?
Well, it was sort of confused motives in a way, because at the time that I was in high school, I think the whole sort of moral fiber of the country was still that, the right thing for a woman or a girl to do was to get married and to have children. And it wasn't so much a dogma that I believed in, more than sort of the emotional state that I believed in. The fact that if you fell in love, that it was for life, that kind of thing. So when I fell in love, in fact, with my high school sweetheart, it was just that sort of emotional dogma that I was caught up in, that I must marry this man and that I must, that I would have his children, and that love was all kind of a thing, that sort of romantic attachment with love, which I think I still believe in pretty much.
You do?
Yeah, I've always been pretty much liberated even then because of the ambitions that I had, but it was sort of watered down by this other emotional attachment to romance and falling in love with one man and making a lifetime relationship work and going through life together, sort of you and me against the world kind of a thing. And so that sort of dissipated my ambitions for a certain amount of time. I always hoped when I got married that it wouldn't preclude any other things that I wanted to do. But for a time, I think the emotional feelings that I had toward Jim Welch as a high school sweetheart and my first love sort of overrode that for a point. And then the marriage was unsuccessful. So that sort of made me a little sour on the subject. I sort of thought, well, this is not how it's supposed to be, There's not a lot of happiness involved here. The relationship is not really working out beautifully and idealistic as I would like it. And as a matter of fact, it's pretty terrible. And I have to get out of this situation, because I also was relating to the fact that my mother and father never had what I thought was a happy marriage. And I thought, well, here I am, I'm doing what I felt was right. And I looked at my mother and thought, would I stay married 17 years to somebody in order to provide the right atmosphere for my children, so to speak, in other words, for their sake? And I decided that that was a foolish sacrifice. It really did not, in fact, work for the children, that it always was more of a burden for them to go along with an unhappy family life and a sacrificial parent, sort of in a martyrdom in marriage. So I thought, well, this is not happy, and after a 3-year period, it was really a situation emotionally I couldn't stand anymore. And I thought, I better try to do something else. I better see what else life has in store for me. I will now pursue the things that I want to do professionally and as a career and as a vocation, even though at that time there was still a lot of talk about, well, you're giving up a lot. As a woman, you won't be a woman, and as a matter of fact, you won't be fulfilled as a woman if you pursue other things. But I sort of moved against that and went ahead with my ambitions and hoped that I could find both in the end in some kind of a relationship.
Your recollections of your childhood, of your parents, happy ones, good ones, isolated ones?
Well, I have to say that a lot of them were kind of unhappy and full of strain, and others of them were positive, but only in retrospect. My house was, my home life was fairly tense because my parents were, I think, very honest in a sense to the family sort of image that they were trying to create, but they didn't truly get along. It wasn't a happy atmosphere. It was an atmosphere of tension. My mother was always very nurturing and very encouraging to me and very good with problems and very understanding and gave a lot of herself, where my father was super critical and very well, kind of ambitious for me, not in the show business sense, because he never really considered that a reality, but as far as grades were concerned, or anything at all that was attempted, you had to be perfect. And so he was a kind of a tyrannical figure in a sense. And now looking back on that, that may have had some advantages to it, because I was being well pushed in a way. I was being, I had to be a striver. I had to succeed in order to please my father as a woman, and the daughter-father relationship being what it is. And so, in a way, I'm grateful to him for a certain amount of diligence and determination. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I'm also a victim of a lot of self-criticism that leads me to a certain amount of despair and negative thinking and pessimism as far as my own talents are concerned, which I think has hurt me a little bit. My mother was always very nurturing, but also, you know, the fact that she gave up a great deal of her life to create a family atmosphere was a sort of a, without being a sad sack about it, she was still making a sacrifice. And I've always sort of fought with that, because I've not wanted to make the sacrifices, and I feel a little guilty that I haven't made them where my children are concerned as much as she did. You know, those kind of impressions are what really happened.
Are your parents alive now? Do you see them? Do you speak with them?
Yes, they're both alive. And my father's ill at the moment. My mother is living in San Diego, and I see her quite often, and she comes up to the house. And sometimes when I'm away on my long tours or movie things, she comes and stays at the house and with the children and just sees that, you know, everything is kind of going all right. So it's not just somebody impersonal here with the kids.
Later on, 5 or 10 years from the point that you're talking about, when your parents first became conscious of your extraordinary celebrity, what was the reaction? Were they? I remember there was a time I remember that you brought a report card home to your father, and he was disturbed at the fact that I think you had only received a B or a B plus as opposed to an A, and it would suggest that he was always wanting more. Demanding.
Yeah.
What was his reaction when finally it appeared that you had fulfilled what he would consider to be something pretty heavy?
Well, once again, I think that he was very proud. Both of them were proud of me and happy for me that I had success in the way, well, not even in the way that I wanted it in the beginning, but that I had, that I was obviously making a successful impression on the world at large and was a success for sort of popular standards. But there was always the sort of reservation that perhaps I should have studied Shakespeare and I could have been a more legitimate and more respected figure than a figure of glamour who is always a target for certain kinds of jokes and certain kinds of criticism.
So I'm still not quite certain. Are they happy with the way things worked out for you? Would they rather still that you'd be appearing in Macbeth? And
no, I think the overriding impression is that they're happy and pleased for me. Yes, there are the few reservations, but.
You married your first husband when you were, I believe, 15?
16.
16, and that marriage I think lasted about 2 years.
3 years.
I'm doing well on these numbers.
That's right.
Would it be too personal to inquire as to the reasons why that marriage did not work out outside of your career aspirations?
Well, it wasn't really career aspirations. It didn't make the marriage work because I was very committed to the marriage. I think it was a matter of the fact that we were high school sweethearts and we were still very unformed as personalities. I don't think that when you're still a teenager you have formed an identity for yourself completely. And so we were trying to tackle that, and he didn't really have a vocation that he felt happy in. He was doing some fishing. He was a fisherman, a professional fisherman. He was out on long treks to Peru and things like this, and he couldn't really deal with what he might do in sort of a more conventional kind of a work atmosphere. He's now in real estate. But he's not a man who could go to the office every day, that kind of thing, have regular hours. He's never had a great talent for academia or, that kind of a life. But he's very charming and dealt well with people and a very smart man. So real estate is probably a good thing for him, and he can travel a lot. But at that time, he didn't know, so he was, in the throes of personality changes, and I was in the same kind of a thing, because to be a mother for me was something that was almost a bit, something that too much to bite off at that age. I was accepting the responsibilities, but accepting them with a lot of strain and a lot of unsureness, and I just think we were too young, and we didn't know who we really were, because once you got out of the school situation, it wasn't the same thing at all to be in real life and to have to work for a living, to have to come home, to have to decide what kind of a home you wanted to make, what kind of specific aspirations you had for yourself as a family person and as part of a unit were just too much for us. That was really just all it was, immaturity, really.
Still see him, speak with him?
I haven't spoken with him up till the last year, for almost something like 10 years. We really sort of estranged ourselves once I became a film star and went to Europe for a couple of years and started just traveling all the time. I wasn't available, and I married somebody else who adopted the children, and there was an estrangement there because of that situation. But now that the children are more curious about seeing their real father and everything, we've set up kind of a dialogue and a relationship together, so that the kids can, so that they really have my sanction to go and see their real father, as it were.
And they have, and
yeah, they're beginning to, investigate that person in their life who really was not a part of their growing up period, but was their natural father in the beginning, which is kind of a hard thing to do. But, something that is their right to do, and I am very much in favor of it and want to encourage it. So on that basis, we've talked quite a lot on the telephone, but I haven't seen him in many, many years. It's must be about 13 years that I've actually seen him.
Would you like to?
I don't know. I suppose a certain amount of curiosity, but I feel so removed from him that it's mainly for the children that I feel, that the relationship is valuable for either one of us.
It was about this time, well, a year or two prior to the time of your first marriage, that you became conscious of the fact that you were different. You were just different. You became conscious of your own beauty. Other people made you conscious of your beauty.
Yeah.
What was your initial reaction to the fact that when people looked at you, they said, "Well, for heaven's sake, I mean, there is a lady somewhat different than Mom,"
Well, I think I keep saying everything is mixed, but I guess it really is, because in the very beginning, I was pleased that that I had physical attractiveness, because I identified that with a ticket to a certain kind of life as a woman, not so much in the career sense, because I never felt as a teenager, as a child, that I was in the league of movie star beauty. It was like sort of homegrown flower, a big fish in a small pool, and I might be the high school beauty or the town beauty or even the city beauty, but I never equated myself with the great beauties of the world. It was just simply that I knew And I think it had to do with, again, the kind of attitudes toward women then, that to be an attractive girl meant that life was going to be a little bit better than if you were not attractive. And that was a plus. There were also downsides to that, because there was a constant attitude toward a pretty girl that you were, in fact, just that.
Yes.
And why would you want to be more, number one, and that you probably couldn't be more, that you were both shallow, vain, and lacking in other areas, because you had sort of an overflow of benefits in the beauty department. And so you come across a certain amount of envy and criticism even at that point. And I found also that boys and men reacted to me in two sort of distinct ways. With the exception of a few, most men or boys would react either as threatened and frightened by the fact that I was a very pretty girl, very attractive girl with some kind of sense of that, and were frightened off by it, thinking, oh, well, she'll never, like me. She probably wouldn't even give me the time of day, and I probably better not talk to her because I'll get all tongue-tied and I won't know what to say, and then I'll make a fool of myself. Or the other one was, boy, this is really a nice piece and I better hit on her real quick, So you got the guys who were super aggressive, and the guys who were just off balance completely by having to deal with a beautiful woman who in fact was sort of somehow a challenge to their masculinity. I mean, what were you supposed to do with a girl like that? I mean, then you must have to really be special, and would you be in fact up to it, and maybe you shouldn't even try. So that seems to be still the case today, I think, with a lot of men's reactions to women who have an image or an aura, or just are plain gorgeous. I hear that even in conversations. I hear that kind of reaction to other beautiful women who I'm around a lot, and other beautiful celebrities. It's like, wow, let's go for that right away, or, oh my God, what'll I say?
At the time that you were beginning to, or were you conscious of that then, or are you conscious of it now upon reflection? I mean, at the time, 13, 14, 15, 16, when men first started to show you attention, were you aware of the game and the trip that was going on, or was that something that only occurred to you later on in your life?
Oh, I was aware of it then.
From the beginning.
Yeah, I was aware of it then, but my father was very, very strict as well as being demanding. And he always gave me the feeling, being a Latin man, that all, especially beautiful women or women of good upbringing, were above any kind of carnal involvements or emotions, or they should not try to elicit this kind of a reaction from the opposite sex, that you were supposed to hold yourself above it. So when I was a teenager, I used to have kind of a duality, because I was very pleased to have physical attractiveness and have people like me for that reason, but at the same time I took on an aloof kind of an approach to people. I almost was distant with people, because I didn't want to have to deal with all these different things, and also it fell into line with what my father expected of me. So it was kind of being a tease on one end, and then sort of really being a little bit removed, and I suppose a kid on the schoolground would call it stuck up. And it was, kind of hard, because I was trying, in a way, to escape having to deal with this unfamiliar and awkward dealings with this reaction all the time. So I sort of held myself apart a little bit,
Last night, in preparation for the interview, I was watching a replay of a video cassette of a television interview with you, between you and Rona Barrett.
Yeah.
And I thought you did a very fine job on that, by the way, with you. I mean, you really came off extraordinarily well. She got, because Rona has set the groundwork for so much of what the rest of us do, I feel that it's okay, because of public interest, to talk with you, as Rona did, about sexuality, about your initial sexual experiences, as to whether or not they were fulfilling. And I mean, Rona said it, I can say it, it's been on television. When was that part of your consciousness? When was the strictness of your dad? When did that give way to passion?
To passion.
He delicately
to a heated
inquires.
moment. Well, heated moments began when I took one look at Jim Welch and the color of his eyes and his broad shoulders and his dark hair. He was an incredibly good-looking man, or boy at the time, and I fell in love instantly. I have a tendency to do this kind of falling in love instantly. Yeah, I found that more times than not, I'm a love at first sight kind of a person. It's kind of strange. Something just clicks in me, and then that's it. That's the end of my father's restrictions and the end of all of that. And I feel very passionately and very emotionally, sort of involved with anybody who I fall in love with. And I haven't fallen in love that much in my life, and maybe it's because I'm still looking in a romantic sense all the time for a kind of, not Prince Charming, but for that particular man, a one-man situation. So that a lot of people that I meet and I like, are really in an area of friendship and enjoyment and sharing on a platonic situation, but nothing really sort of cataclysmic happens. Yeah, but when the moment strikes me that I'm really hook, line, and sinker in love with somebody, then I'm very much...
Do you recall the circumstances with Jim? Was that a rewarding experience?
Well, it was just high school, waiting on he just happened to be standing in front of the administration building. What can I tell you, And I was coming up the steps, and I said, "Who is that?"
And was that something that you were pleased with?
Yes, but I think in adolescence it's all sort of a very fumbling, awkward situation, because he was the first love of my life, and you don't really know too much in the beginning, do you?
No, you don't.
So it's a little bit strange.
Jumping ahead, school ended. You went to Europe. You did a series of films. One particular film, arriving in America, resulted in a remarkable amount of notoriety or attention for you. A film where you did not have a speaking part, indeed. When there must have been a time here or there when you walked into a theater late at night and sat in the back row and watched, were aware of audience reaction. Did you know the first time you saw yourself in the film, well, I got this one licked. It's going to be okay from here on in? Or did you look at your film and say, I'm a little worried. I'm a little worried about that image sticking with me for a long time. Will it change? How did you feel the first time?
Well, in my first films, I very rarely sat in the back of movie houses, because it was very clear to me when I saw them in private screenings that they were quite laughable. And later on, after Three Musketeers, it turns out that I am a very funny lady. But I didn't realize that I was funny then, and I thought, there's something very funny going on here, and I don't know exactly what it is, but somehow it's, not quite what I had imagined for myself. I never felt comfortable with my early films because there was a visual image that didn't go with the personality that I was producing or that I was projecting at the time. And one of the reasons for that was that I probably I projected a pretty good personality in 1,000,000 Years BC, strangely enough, without the dialogue. It was very much a performance of my own making and of my own sort of movements, even without the dialogue. I had a kind of an image of what this sort of strange creature in prehistoric times, it was really not a prehistoric girl at all, but this sort of an image of this cave woman beauty would be, and that didn't bother me so much as although I thought it was hokey. I knew it had to be hokey for the kind of a thing, the whole piece was, sort of monster movie, dinosaur movie, in the classic sense of those crazy movies. but then later on, when I started doing light comedy and things, I realized that my personality was not out on the screen, that I was in fact acting, and that there was a physical image there that was striking and compelling, but there was nothing to go along with it. There was something missing. There was a distance there that was not being filled in, and it bothered me a lot, mainly because I didn't know how. I think I knew how to do the lines, but I didn't know how to really act in the sense of projecting yourself into the character, and by doing so, making the character real, because there was an unreality about me and one-dimensional thing about me that I really didn't like, and I didn't know how to get over it. But also I was inundated with all the technicalities that go along with filmmaking, and I didn't have a strong legitimate theater background to fall back on for technique, just strictly actor's technique. So it took me a couple of years to just make pictures and feel comfortable on a set where I knew what the hell all these people were doing, from sound to lights to cameras to angles to what you do on close-ups, how to pace yourself in performances when you have to do them over and over again, how to deal with other actors who are not of the same style as you are, what directors can be expected to offer and what they sometimes don't offer and leave blank for you to fill in. And so all of that took me a certain amount of time to become just accustomed to. And then after that, I resumed some studying with the Actors Studio and Lee Strasberg Institute and another private coach by the name of Justin Smith. And just began to deal with, the actual characterizations I was going to put on the screen. And from that point on, I have found myself much more successful, but I still can't look at myself in a role without being super critical and saying, well, maybe I should have been more this way or more that way. And but I think that's fairly natural. But I usually know, even without seeing myself at this point, whether I'm doing a good job with a character as an actress, and that's gotten a lot better. But in the early films, what was happening was over-stylized, because I didn't know how to deal with reality, getting the reality of myself in. I still had a lot of inhibitions and insecurities in front of a camera that I couldn't surmount for a couple of years. And also the fact that there was a lot of criticism of me being a sex symbol. The fact that I came on a set and I knew everybody expected me to be bad, that it made me uptight, and I was trying almost to prove myself, and at the same time the atmosphere around me was making me feel that I really was this really illegitimately in this position, and that I had no right to have a role as an actress, So it was real difficult for me to overcome this feeling that I was nothing more than a pretty face or a body, and it inhibited me a lot in my work. So now I've sort of come past that point where I can deal with it.
Now that changed a great deal. Myra Breckenridge, Three Musketeers, suddenly there were a lot of people who were beginning to take notice, who were beginning to say, above and beyond the fact that she's extraordinarily beautiful, yes, she can act. She has a wonderful comedic sense about her, that there's a marvelous electricity that comes through the screen. Were you resentful of the fact that it took them that long to realize that there was something else going on, or are you bitter a little about?
I'm not bitter. I'm regretful of the fact that this sort of real prejudice against ladies of a certain image in film, which everybody knows about, a la Marilyn Monroe, Rita Hayworth, name them. That prejudice is like a wall, it just permeates the atmosphere around every place that you work. And I'm not bitter about it. I'm just sad that, it was so inhibiting. But at the same time, there is nobody that can help you through it except yourself in the final analysis. So once you finally find a place in your mind where you can close out all of that and just do what you have to do and not let it interfere with what you're doing, then you find that everything is okay. But it took me a while to break down the barriers of other people around me, because it's not just the people in the theaters only see the result of the working situation, and you feel the skepticism, around you of everything, and of that attitude on the set, and that's what destroys you, and it's just it's a terrible sort of personal crucifixion that you go through, and at one point you have to decide that you're either going to lick it or it's going to lick you, and it's just very difficult. I don't really blame anybody for it. I just think I'm happier now that maybe people's attitudes towards women have changed substantially, so that they're not thinking so much in terms of limited areas of achievement for women. Either they're a beauty, or they're a housewife, or they're an intellectual, or they're a professional woman, and that they have to be pigeonholed like that. Although I still find, even to this day, that with all the opening up that we've done with Women's Lib, that there's a certain still amount of prejudice involved with the sex goddess image, because the women's libbers say all that I'm exploiting myself as a sex object, and I say yes, and happily so. And what's the matter with it? It's a terrific thing. And you are in fact sort of overreacting and going a little bit too far left, or or right, I suppose you could even call it. They've sort of gotten, I don't know what do you call it when you get, is the extreme women's lib movement, is that right? Is that being conservative? No, I guess it's left. It's hard to make out what they're doing. But I'm in the middle ground still, because what I'm trying to say, and what I think I've been trying to say since I was little, a child and through adolescence, is that I wanted really to have a full spectrum of experiences and achievements as a human being. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be the sex object, not necessarily the sex symbol. I didn't particularly know that would happen, but it did, and I took advantage of it. But I was happy to be a sex symbol. At the same time, I wanted to be accepted and respected, even in the cliched sense of 1950s, as a human being. I wanted to accomplish things in all areas, and I don't want to be limited as a human being to say, well, it's just like the kind of roles that they're writing in films today. I mean, now the meaningful role for a woman is a much better role, a much more real role than we've had before, but it's the Ellen Bernsteins and the Glenda Jacksons who get the offers. It's still said to me that it's literally impossible for me to play a real woman. And I say, yes, but you're completely mad, because I walk down the streets of the world from Paris to Brazil to New York City, and I see beautiful women and girls on the street, and they're alive, and they're functioning, and their heads tick, and they're doing things, and some of them are very bright, and they have problems, and they're in transition. And why does it have to be that you're just eliminating this area of reality and humanity? You're not human. I mean, are you saying that I cannot play a human being because I have a sex symbol image? I mean, that's ludicrous. I mean, I'm a full functioning human being. So what I'm really striving for at this point is still, a resistance to the fact of being a total human being.
One final question. When it is over, Raquel, how would you like people to remember you? Not your career, but your life. I mean, when people speak about you after you're no longer with us, does it matter? Do you care? Do you want to leave behind a legacy? Is there a thought that you would like people to retain when they say, what has she accomplished during the time that she was here?
Well, I've been asked that question before, and I always come back to the same thing. I really just, I really just think that it's as simple as the fact, of course I want to be accepted as a good actress and as an artist, but at the same time, if when I was gone and somebody turned over one of those coffee table books and came across my picture, and they said, she was just a great chick. That would be terrific for me.
That's enough.
Well, I like that idea, because I think the overriding thing that I am, with all of my striving, to be accepted as an artist, and that being a very much a reality to me. I think that being a woman is still terribly important, and I would like that, whatever essence or symbol I make of a woman, to be a good one, and to be one that brings joy and good feelings and nice vibrations. I think that that's real important still in today's world.